Right, good evening. Welcome to the Executive Scrutiny Board, Tuesday the 8th of March. Do you have any apologies? Hardiel?
Councillor Alison Martin.
If not, we'll move on to late items. I don't have any. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest, please? No? Okay. You've got item 5, the forward plan. I think you've had copies of that. Okay. And item 6, Council Cabinet response to the scrutiny recommendations. You've also had that. And item 7, performance plan. Any comments or observations? Lucy.
Thank you. I've written here, the presentation on the intelligent-led council working smarter was supposed to come to this meeting, but it was also referenced that it would be going to the meeting in the Corporate Services Board meeting. And I went and looked at the December's Corporate Services Board papers. And sorry, I'll move that round. It suggested that the intelligence-led council and working smarter would be going to the December Corporate Services Board, and I couldn't see it on their agenda. And I just wanted confirmation that it had actually appeared there. Otherwise, we may be missing having that item looked at.
Stephen, can you help us with that?
Chair, thank you. I'll check with my colleagues to see when that's obviously where that's supposed to be going. I was a bit confused by it saying March and December, but that's where it's supposed to be going. I'll find out if it's been, and if it's not, when it's going.
When it's going to where? Yeah.
To that particular board.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 8, the Council Cabinet agenda. The first item that we have is item 7, the recommendations from Executive Scrutiny. And then item 8, the minute extract from the Community Scrutiny Board. I don't know if anybody's got any comments on that, or those two. If not, we'll move on to item 9, update on UK City of Culture. Mike Brown. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. So just it's a report that we're bringing to update on the process that we're going through for UK City of Culture, and the recommendation is to endorse the Council's continued support for work towards that ambition of being named.
Can you speak up, Mike, a bit? I think Hardiel is probably struggling a little bit.
Is that better?
I am, yeah, thanks.
Is that better? Yeah? Yeah, okay. So the recommendation is to endorse the Council's continued support for the work towards the ambition for Derby to be named UK City of Culture in 2025. Culture has been agreed as a key driver for the city's reinvention, and the next stages of the competition are that we should find out whether we have been shortlisted in a couple of weeks' time. So that's the week commencing the 21st of March. If we are successful in being shortlisted down to the final 4, we will receive an expert advisory panel visit from the judging panel and colleagues from the DCMS to visit Derby and understand more about the city and about the bid. And then the final announcement of the winner will be made in May. So the report covers the work that's been undertaken to date and the consultation that's been undertaken with various stakeholders across the city. And if we are successful in reaching the next stages of the competition, then further information will be brought back to Cabinet for approval and for updates. So I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thanks very much for that, Mike. I'm sure I speak on behalf of the whole of the committee in wishing you and your team well in this bid. It affects us all in a positive way if we're successful, and so we're all keeping our fingers crossed. So Godspeed, and let's hope we're successful. Thank you for that. Any comments or questions from any members? Lucy?
It would have been lovely to actually be able to see the bid and see all the work that's gone on, but it wasn't attached as an appendix. Is it available somewhere?
Whilst we are in the competition stage, we are keeping the contents of the bid quite close to our chests, yes, because there's a lot of information in there which is very relevant to Derby and to the ambition that we're putting forward. And if the other cities are aware of what we've put into our bid, then they can counter that if they have the visits from the judging panel. But yes, as we progress, the intention is to produce a copy of the bid that can be circulated and made available to people at the appropriate point.
Top secret, Lucy. I'm sure you understand.
Not even there as a confidential paper.
Rachel?
I mean, clearly we're not an expert at bidding for these things in this particular process, but we have got an expert advisor who worked on both the Hull and the Coventry bids, who's been giving us that independent advice. And his advice was very strongly that you should probably hold all that information to yourself for this process, because it is quite a fierce competition, and clearly some of the things we're planning in terms of the programme of events is in the bid, and that would be potentially detrimental to our bid if we made that publicly available. So that was the advice, and we're taking that advice to be on the safe side.
I think on balance we understand. Most of us anyway. Okay. All right, thanks very much for that. Okay, thanks very much, Mike. You're more than welcome to stay for the whole of the meeting, but I'm sure you've got better things to do the next 2 or 3 hours. Thank you. Moving on to item 9. Rachel, I think, yes it is, Infrastructure Programme and Capital Programme 22-23. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to say, my director, Werner Bass, who would have been here, unfortunately, is a family funeral today, so I will try and take this report and answer members' questions, but perhaps be kind to me about that. It's a standard annual report that we get at Cabinet this time of year every year, and it really just lays out the proactive planned approach we take to asset management of the highways network and how we spend our capital around making sure the highways network is safe and effective, and how we spend on our vehicles and plant for the authority and our flood defence work. The flood defence work does not include the OCAL programme, which is a large programme that is aligned to. This is about looking at the capital for our flood defence outside of OCAL. It's a 3-year programme, which is good practice. We work very closely with the Department of Transport on how we put together the plan and some of the principles that are used behind it. And given the complexity of some of the schemes, having a 3-year plan is very effective. It is indicative for the future 2 years. So 2023, 24, they are indicative at this stage. They're more worked up over the next 12 months, but there is a clear intention around that 3-year period. It is tied to the priorities set in our local transport plan that members see, and our asset management approach based on prioritisation around risk on the network. And as in previous years, neighbourhood boards are consulted on these schemes in their own communities and bringing those forward. The key issue really to raise from this report for members this time is risk, and clear risks in the market and commercial conditions that surround, obviously, the purchase of supplies and labour around dealing with, capital projects across the board. There are significant cost increases that we are seeing in that supply chain, and that's before, clearly, the war in Ukraine is going to have an impact as well around energy and supply. So some real serious concerns about how deliverability of this programme based on some of those issues. We're talking to the Department of Transport about it at a national level, and they're giving advice to all local authorities on how to plan. And there are some various sort of issues being discussed about how we might want to plan for that, which is very difficult, and maybe about restricting access to particular supply chains at a national level around priority, which is clearly quite significant. Potential of 25% increases and potentially more than that, so and access to particular goods. So that is the biggest risk in this programme is going to be how we manage that, really. That'll be central to the work. The Infrastructure Programme Capital Board is the board that manages that inside the council. And just to say for members' information, very successful as a council in bidding for external money to fund particular aspects of additional support for our infrastructure. So transforming cities, members are very aware of that, £61 million to support our public service transport scheme in the city. That's going forward and happening at the moment, and there'll be an update for Cabinet very shortly on progress against that. We bid for money for the improvement of the bus station, that again was supported, and we've bid for money for traffic signals maintenance, again supported by government. So wherever we can, we look at external funding and try and put those bids in to get additional money in to support the council's programme. So we'll continue to do that. And then clearly central to the last 2 years has been the additional 9 million funding put into the infrastructure for the highways network that was funded by the council. And that's really focused on how we can use that for innovation, technology, buying additional equipment that really improves our capacity to be more efficient in our highways improvements. And that should give us ongoing efficiency, but clearly that programme finishes at the end of this financial year, and as all councils are facing challenges about their funding and plus the impact of extreme weather, we are looking at the impact and the contribution that has made, and there'll be a condition survey taking place in the spring that will help us to understand the relevance of that and what we can do next. So any questions, happy to take them, but just mindful I've got all the detail about some of that from, I'm afraid, members. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to draw members' attention to page 3, 4.1b, 4.2 and 4.34. I think we missed a bit of an opportunity here because in recent weeks we've witnessed the very troubling gridlock and associated anger and frustration of many hundreds of motorists trying to leave the Kingsway retail park via the Kingsway roundabout. We have seen that many hundreds of motorists literally being stuck there for many hours at a time. And this is simply just not acceptable. And the only responses that most councillors and the public have seen seem to be a bit like a game of pass the parcel, with the police pointing at the council saying it's the council's responsibility, they need to do something. Then we have the council pointing at the owners of the Kingsway site saying, no, they should build a new road. Then we have the owners of the Kingsway site saying, oh, it's Highways England, it's the council, it's the police, anybody but us. This pass the parcel has got to stop. And the blame game and lack of information about how and when it will be resolved simply cannot continue. And as part of the infrastructure programme, Board Programme 22-23, there's no specific mention of this very concerning problem, and there needs to be. So I'll be making a recommendation this evening, and hopefully I'll get support. It's non-party political, but because it's a problem we know is there, we know it needs to be resolved, and we need to bang some heads together. So therefore, I'm going to recommend this, that Executive Scrutiny recommends to Cabinet that the responsible Cabinet members urgently convene a meeting with all interested parties and that they provide and publicise a scheme to resolve this problem, spelling out how and when it will be delivered. I think it's as simple and straightforward as that, because I think we as councillors have a right to know, and I think we'll only have a right to know if we get all those three people together. It's not just the council, it's got to be the owners of that site. It may involve the police and it will involve Highways England. But as we'll have a decision being made in June, well in summer this year, about the A38 and the flyover, this is a particularly sensitive time and we shouldn't miss this opportunity by banging some heads together, because as part of that scheme there may be something that can be done to ease up the problems, maybe another road into the site. I don't want to prejudge it, but I'm sure our Cabinet members, together with the owners of the site, the police and Highways England, can come up with a solution. But we need that and the public need that. Would I have a seconder for the recommendation at all? Thank you, Lucy.
Can I say that I think this is a good example of where we're not getting, as most councillors, we're not getting enough communication as to what's happening and what's going on. This is on the very edge of Littleover Ward, and I pester the Highways team to say what's happening, what can we do about it. So I do know that there was a change to the controller on the junction on the ring road just 10 days ago, and I think that might have made a difference, but it hasn't solved the A38 end, and it hasn't solved the originating problems within the car parks. So, yeah, and I think the important thing there is that we get communication back to councillors to actually know what's going on.
Could you just repeat your recommendation again?
Recommendation, sure. Executive Scrutiny therefore recommends to Cabinet that the responsible Cabinet members urgently convene a meeting with all interested parties and that they provide and publicise a scheme to resolve this problem, spelling out how and when it will be delivered.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would just point out that elsewhere within this paper, there are also project which is getting funded to install 2 pedestrian crossings at that same roundabout. So that needs to be taken into account in any discussions.
You're absolutely right, Mike, and that's what drew my attention to it, thinking, well, we're looking at pedestrian crossing the Kingsway site. What about the problem? So you're absolutely right, it needs to be resolved at the same time. I know you're spending money on that, you know, and all that time and that officer effort and scarce public resources go into that. We may as well, you know, combine it together and sort it out. It just seems a sensible way forward. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask the senior officer who's delivered this if there has been any meetings with those parties? Maybe she can give an insight and it might answer your question, some part of your question, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I understand there have been meetings with the owner of the site and advice given and support given, but that hasn't been particularly conducive to finding a solution. I'm not aware we've had meetings with the police and Highways England as part of that conversation. I can't answer that. I'm not sure about that bit. I do know we have met the owner of the site.
Thanks, Rachel. And I appreciate that response from senior officers. I think it's now it's up to us as elected members to shine the spotlight on all the parties. The owners of the site, they need to come to the table. And what the owners of the site can't just expect the City Council to do is stump up all the money and come up with all the ideas. They've got to play a major part in it. I won't use that site because I'm not going to risk being stuck there for 3 or 4 hours. And I don't see why any of your constituents should be stuck there for 3 or 4 hours, many of whom will have health problems and all sorts of issues that they just cannot afford to be stuck there. Yeah.
I've been stuck there myself, so I know exactly how frustrated anyone would be. I think it was 3 hours. I was stuck on there once. It was when they put the traffic lights in as part of the Section 278 project when the new housing scheme went in, and they were turned on, and it was an absolute disaster. And it's still not been sorted, even when the lights have been turned off. So, you know, I agree that it's a terrible situation. Just want to dial down into some detail so we all understand. Just to Rachel, if the property owner just digs their heels in and says they don't want to cooperate, they don't want anything happening on their land, is there any framework or policy or legal position where something could be forced to happen?
Rachel?
I mean, if the owner is refusing to cooperate in any way, then we are limited in our ability to enforce them to do things on their own land. That is a reality. We can use our cajoling and encouragement sort of support, but we can't force anything to happen if they refuse to do that on their own land.
I hope that the owners of this site will be responsible and reasonable in their response. And I hope that the media will be asking these reasonable questions on behalf of the 250,000 people. Many people like yourself who are stuck there for hours and ill can afford to be stuck there for hours. And I think they're accountable. Just because they own the site doesn't mean that they're not accountable to the public. Because otherwise, like myself, I'll just take my custom elsewhere. And I think that's what we'll either individually and collectively will have to do and say to them, look, we don't want to sort of threaten with blackmail, but we hope and expect you'll respond reasonably. But if not, then you send a message to the public that you don't want the public there. And then we will be advising there are other shopping centres that they can actually go to get their cooperation. Hopefully we won't need to go that far, and hopefully they'll respond positively. I've got Hardyall, and then I'll say Alan. Hardyall, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I think it's been a long-standing problem, and many people have experienced what Councillor Cooper said, and I have myself. So we do need to see how we can encourage and get everybody around the table to find a solution, because I know other things have been attempted in the past. Nothing's really helped resolve it, and we can only commend our cabinet members, the relevant cabinet members, to join together with other parties to see whether we can find a solution, because it's long overdue, and it's probably opportune now, because in this paper there is that document about putting a pedestrian crossing on the other side, and that's related to the housing developments on the other side of the on the roundabout. But this is a good time to try to see if we can find a solution for this long-standing problem that has not been resolved for years.
You're absolutely right, Hardy. And as as you rightly say, and I said earlier, if we're spending money on pedestrian facilities right onto the island where it's gridlocked, if the Highways England are going to spend multi-million pounds on the A38 flyover, if this isn't an opportune time to look at a problem which is a matter of yards away, then I don't know when is. And to miss that opportunity, I think, would be scandalous, and rightly so. And I'm getting the impression that we're going to be putting the pressure on all parties to actually look at this urgently and get it resolved. So, Alan, did you want to come in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And Rachel's explanation I appreciate. Similar to Councillor Cooper, I've been stuck on in that car park for about 2 to 3 hours, and it's something I wouldn't wish on anybody. And I'll certainly support the motion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. OK, we'll go to the vote. Those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Rachel. To item... Oh, sorry, I'm racing ahead. We've got other items with regard to item 10. Item 10, sorry, Lucy. There's still other aspects of it.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of other people who want to ask about different things on this. I think it's a really important paper, and I look forward to getting it each year because it gives us a bit of a structure as to the sort of things that the Council is going to be trying to achieve in the coming year. I've got some specific questions, and I don't know whether Rachel will be able to answer them, and I've also got a couple of points that I'd like to also put forward as recommendations. So the first one of those is on page 12, and it's what the difference is between two of the items in this list. There's item LDT01 and LDT02, which look remarkably similar in terms of what's here. But with different headings, and I don't know what the difference is. Design of Future Years and Forward Works Programme. What's the difference between those, which have the same subtext?
Rachel?
So I can't answer that question. I can get you a written answer in probably tomorrow, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Rachel.
Then on page 16, we have, again, two questions that I just wanted to... A question I'd just like to clarify. TMT14 at the top of page 16 is one of the little over priorities, which when we've been talking to officers, we've made it clear that speed on Pastures Hill is one of the clear concerns that people have. It's not just the roundabout at the bottom. And I wanted reassurance that that project would include the speed on Pastures Hill, as well as the results of that speed, which lead to collisions at the roundabout.
Rachel, thanks.
I'll set that away and give a written answer to that as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. That's okay.
Can I give another one for your list, please?
It's
with regard to my own ward in Darley, page 15, TMT11. Killison Road service roads, traffic management, consultation and introduction of parking and partial one-way restrictions to address traffic management concerns. Could you get me some more details about which part of Killison Road? Is it in Darley Ward? What's being proposed and why? And then some consultation with me as ward councillor. Thank you, Rachel. Hardiel.
Let Rachel write down the last one. Paragraph 4.4.1, highways infrastructure funding. I know we've been very successful, Rachel, over the last 2 years in getting 3 million and 6 million, up to 9 million pounds for much needed highways and infrastructure funding. I do know from my chair as the Scrutiny, Community Scrutiny Board chair, that future funding, we're not sure what we will get, and we might be reverting back to previous funding. Is that correct? And if that is the case, what would be the shortfall, and what are we doing to actually progress that? I know that my Scrutiny Board put a recommendation to the Cabinet member to write to government to not reduce our funds for highways infrastructure, because our list of needs and demands are a lot greater than the funding we normally got in the past. Can you give any update on that, please?
Yeah, Thank you, Chair. So absolutely, the 9 million was additional money over the core budget for obviously highways maintenance, and that, as has been said, is coming to an end. Part of that funding has been used to purchase equipment and technology that are going to enable us to be more efficient in our core highways maintenance programme. But absolutely, the impact of that additional investment over that period of time, it was one-off, if you like. It's not built into the base budget. We will be doing a condition survey to understand the contribution that has made to the condition on the highways network and where the shortfall is, and clearly, as all councils across the country are in the same position about having less funding than they need to really be able to maintain a quality condition and safety on our roads. I said at the beginning, we use an asset management approach to go where the most risky areas are, but that is clearly, that's how we should be using that money, but still it's not going to be enough to meet the conditions we would like to see. We have also written to Baroness Fair, as suggested at Scrutiny panel, ask her to visit Derby and come and see some of our issues and to raise that profile with her, so we're waiting to hear back from her.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, if there's no more questions... Oh, Lucy. Okay, Lucy, item 10.
Yep. And following on the highways infrastructure funding, my route into Derby is along Uttoxeter New Road, and the state of Uttoxeter New Road carriageway is appalling at the moment. It seems to have crumbled this winter. It's got really bad. But it's not the only place. And we haven't got within this paper the lists of which pavements and which carriageways are going to be in the programme. I very much look forward to seeing those. I'm pleased that the amount given for footways is quite high this year as a proportion. If we're going to encourage people to walk, we need to be people to be able to walk safely and comfortably. So, but we have got so much to do. As part of that, I also want us to be mindful that all those heavy engineering functions are actually quite demanding of resources, both energy and also materials. And I've got a recommendation which I was hoping to put, Chair, to say that we should reduce the city's carbon and waste footprint by maximising the reuse of road and footway material as part of our resurfacing, and use recovered aggregates as part of road reconstruction and building when it's required, and to encourage utility companies to do this as well, because it's part of our responsibility, and it's something which I know we are looking at. More and more companies are offering this sort of service as well.
Could you just repeat that, please, Lucy, because I think some people are straining to hear.
It's to recommend to Cabinet to reduce the city's carbon and waste footprint by maximising the reuse of road and footway material as part of resurfacing, and the use of recovered aggregates as part of road reconstruction and building when it's required, and to encourage utility companies to do the same. So that's the first one. And the second one is to ask about the infrastructure things as to where, not our infrastructure programme, the main works programme, and which goes through the infrastructure programme board, which has got its what do you call it? The way it works is written in as an appendix here, which is really helpful because it's a good thing to be reminded of that. But I don't know where the outcomes of that programme board are reported, and I don't know where the slippages that programme board is overseeing are reported. It's sort of that bit doesn't seem to come back to us ever, and it's something which could come back to Cabinet, or it could come back to council at some point. I'm sure it's something that would come or informally to councillors. So I've got a recommendation to Cabinet that they request an annual or more frequent update of all the projects within the Infrastructure Programme Board's remit, highlighting those that haven't been delivered within the approved financial year and with the reasons for the slippage. I know that within Littleover there are projects which we had as approved projects 2 years ago and haven't been delivered because of capacity issues, partly due to COVID and to the engineering skills shortage that we have. But we don't really know what's happening about them, and I don't know the size of this because I'm only aware of the Littleover one.
Do you have a seconder for those recommendations for Lucy? Second both recommendations. They certainly seem uncontroversial. Does anybody wish to speak against them at all, or does anybody have concerns about those recommendations? Or to me, that they seem quite sensible. Okay, if no one wants to go to the vote. Those in favour of both recommendations, please show. Those against, please show. That, yeah, okay, I think that's carried. Yes, that's, both of those are carried. If you can send those to Stephen, please, Lucy. Okay, thank you very much. Right, okay, unless there's anything more on item 10, I'll give Lucy 5 seconds to think. 4, 3, 2, 1. No? Okay, item 11. So we're moving on to item 11. Now, is that going to be Ian or is it going to be Rachel? Ian Fulliger. Ian at the back. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you know, Derby has a significant shortage of housing, both general needs housing and affordable housing. It's clearly very important that we make absolutely the best use of the housing stock, the existing housing stock that we've got within the city, and to make sure that we bring that back into use. If we do have properties standing empty, obviously that then puts more pressure on us to build on greenfield sites and green spaces. It can also be, and members will be very well aware of this, it can be a significant visual blight within a street scene if you've got a house that's standing empty for a long period of time, and members will also be very well aware that those houses can quickly become a focus for antisocial behavioural and criminal activity. The Council's Empty Homes team works with landlords and owners to bring properties back into use. We offer a lot of advice and support in terms of helping particularly single owners how to refurb their properties and best bring them back into use. If we are supporting owners to sell the property to get it back into use, we can offer them discounted rates at the local property auctions, and we can also offer empty homes loans to help make those works more affordable to get the properties back into use. However, when all of that support and the facility for loans fails, it is important that the council has the ability to enforce and actually enforce that homes are brought back into use. And indeed, this report proposes that we take CPO action, compulsory purchase order action, against 4 properties, and all 4 of those properties will have been the subject of complaints from neighbours that they are standing empty. Previous experience would suggest that probably only 1 or 2 of those properties will need to be CPO'd, and I can say that provisionally all 4 or any of those 4 properties would be suitable to be brought into the council's own housing stock. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Any comments, questions? Mike?
Just to commend the report to the council and to this committee, Chair. I have supported Ian's efforts in the past to get these properties back into. I think we could probably do more, but I recognise that resources are limited. I think this is an excellent report, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Mike. Thank you. Okay, if there's no other comments or observations, thank you very much for that, Ian. Moving on to item 12, Derby Enterprise Growth. And for that, we've got Jane Kirby and Stephen Turner. Jane, first of all, and then Stephen afterwards. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Derby Enterprise Growth Fund, as many of you know, is funded by the Economic Growth Team and funded through Regional Growth Fund. We've been running that scheme since 2013 and offers grants and loans to businesses across Derby, hoping to create jobs. Over the last however many years, we've created over 2,000 jobs, which has helped with the objectives of the scheme. Because of the value of this project that's coming to you today, it's classed as a key decision. So therefore, it needs, because of the funding value is 300,000 of a capital grant to fit out their premises at a site in Derby City to be a global centre of excellence. And they will create 28 jobs. For your information, if it does get approved at Cabinet tomorrow, it will go through further due diligence through a third party, which the company pay for themselves. This due diligence looks to fully scrutinise the subsidy controls and viability of the project.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. Anything to add, Stephen? Or? Okay. Right, thank you very much for that, Jane. Any comments, questions? Lucy?
Thank you. I think this is a really nice scheme, and I think it's really good use of money that we've got for, obviously, for this purpose. So it's nice when we get little glimpses of what's going on, but it has got to Cabinet rather than being looked at an officer level. But what would be useful to know is to get an overview as to, you know, we've got 1.6 million in the pot, as it were, at the moment, but how are the flows happening, going in and out? Have we occasionally get someone who's defaulted on it? But in general, an overview would be nice, and I think it's been a while since we've had one.
Okay. Right, thank you very much, Lucy. Any other comments, questions? If not, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Stephen. Again, you're more than welcome to stay for the next 3 or 4 hours, but I think there's a question first. Yeah, sure. Before you go.
Unless I missed it, I couldn't see in the report what the company is. Is there...
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be discussing those in the private session afterwards because of the confidentiality aspect. Okay. Thank you very much. I say you're more than welcome to stay for the next 2 or 3 hours. I'm sure you've got other things to do. Okay, thank you. On to item 13. Item 13 is going to be Alison. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report is regarding the recommendation to write off some...
Alison, could you pull the mic a bit closer? Thank you.
So the purpose of this report is to writing off some of the uncollectible business rate housing benefit overpayment and sundry debts. Collecting income is a major activity of the council, and the report details the significance of some of the values of those over 80 million of business rates, 70 million of sundry debts, and 1.5 million of housing benefit overpayments. There are certain circumstances in which we deem that those debts are not collectible, and that they're detailed in the report. There is a confidential paper as well that supports this report, that gives some of the details into the cases for those particular write-offs. Probably worth adding that actually when we do write debts off as part of the production of the annual statement of accounts, we do make a provision for bad and doubtful debts, where we look at some of the historic debts that we've got to the city, and we do account for those in the year. So whilst we are asking for a recommendation to write off some debts in this report, it will not make a detrimental impact to the outturn position of the council, because we will have already accounted for the non-collection of those historic debts. It's probably worth adding as well that whilst our recovery activity has resumed since the pandemic, we are not yet up to business as usual activity in terms of our recovery processes. The court time is still limited, and our resources are somewhat diverted to attend to other areas in terms of responding to financial support to support businesses and citizens through COVID grants and through the energy rebate schemes. As I said, the details of the individual cases are contained within the redacted private part of this meeting. Appendices 1 to 3 detail the accounts to be written off at a summary level, so you can see the context of the approval. So this report is asking for approval to write off business rate debt of 401,000, housing benefit overpayment debt of 27,000, and sundry debt of just over 16,000, as set out in the report. Thank you.
Yeah, at face value, I mean, certainly members of the public will look at this without perhaps understanding the huge sums involved, £400,000 writing off. But as you say, it's a figure of 80 million, so it's about 0.5% in actual fact, isn't it? Something in that sort of region. But it does seem a huge amount. I know that's what the public will focus in on, I'm sure. Any comments or observations, Lucy?
I think you're right, Chair, that it seems to be a really big sum there within the business side of it. And the introduction has obviously explained that we aren't running at full speed because of the after effects of COVID and the backlog in the courts. And we know that also COVID has hit businesses. And I just wondered whether there was any officer observation as to whether the delay through the courts and COVID impacts on businesses have actually impacted on these? Is there a sort of ballpark figure that we could reflect back that some of these debts may be due to the those impacts rather than things that were more closely within our control?
If you can answer that, Alison, and also to give us a flavour of it, if you could, have you got any sort of figures from pre-pandemic? Would 0.5% be about roughly the rate? Is that better than it probably was, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Is it worse than it was 5 years or 10 years ago?
Thank you, Chair. We did actually bring a report not long ago to the Corporate Scrutiny Board on this, so it might be worth that I actually refresh that and send that round again, because that does give the context for some of this. I think in terms of this paper, it's probably a mixture of both, if I'm honest. There are some historic debt in the paper that relate to 2018-19, so this 400,000 covers a number of financial years, so that would have been prior to the pandemic, so that won't have been affected. I think in terms of post-pandemic, our observations are that, yes, obviously our recovery rates are not up to pre-pandemic levels, but they're not that far out in terms of the support that's been given to some of the businesses. It's probably too soon to say what the long-term effect of that might be, whether we do get up to pre-pandemic levels or not. I mean, as I said, we're not there yet, and it's probably worth giving us some time to be able to look at, as the economy evolves, maybe over to the 6 to 12 months, what the longer-term impact of that might be. But I would say it's probably too soon to say. We're not up to pre-pandemic levels, but there's some historic transactions contained within this report.
Thank you, Alison. That's very good. Thank you. Okay, if there's no more comments or questions on that, then we will look at item 14, which is the contract and financial procedures matters. Who's doing that? Is it Alison? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So within the compliance with contract and financial procedures report, there are 5 items to consider at this cabinet. The first item is in relation to a Department for Levelling Up and Housing Communities homelessness prevention grant. Positive in terms of acceptance of some funding for a ring-fence grant of 207,000 for 21-22 and 986,000 for 22-23. This has been supported, which has been given to the council. This particular grant ensures enforcement of the Homelessness Reduction Act and to contribute to ending rough sleeping by increasing activity to prevent single homelessness. The report does detail the conditions of the grant and the areas and outcomes that's been expected, and the recommendations of the report is to recommend to approve the acceptance of the homelessness prevention grant of the sums disclosed within the report, and to recommend to delegate to the Strategic Director of Corporate Resources and the Strategic Director of Communities in place, and with consultation with the relevant cabinet members, to allocate the grant and homelessness prevention grant funding within their delegations. The second part of the second item within this report is around Health Watch Derby funding arrangements. There is a national requirement in the Health and Social Care Act of 2012 for the establishment of a Health Watch England and an independent local health watch organisation. The report at 4.7 details some of the statutory obligations of the local health watch scheme. And this report is seeking recommendations to approve the award of a new grant agreement of £214,000 per annum for 3 years for the period April 22 to March 25 to support that local health watch. We do have a provider that does already works with the council, and the recommendation is to continue the award of that grant to the existing provider of that. Just to add, in terms of the governance arrangements for that, the governance is provided by the HWD board, and the grant agreement is managed by the council's Adult Social Care Commission and a market management team. So we do have some governance in place to manage that grant conditions. The third item on the report is in relation to COVID grants. This item seeks approval for the acceptance and deployment of Coving grants that have been received, and majority of these reports are being reported retrospectively. The grants have been received in year and have been deployed in year in terms of the condition of the grant approval. You will see in the paper that there's been some significant grants that that have been received over the course of the last year. The first is in relation to the Adult Social Care Infection Control Fund. And you can see there that the grant consists of 3 distinct allocations of funding: infection prevention and control for just over 4 million, vaccine funding of 127,000 and testing funding of 1.8 million, which totals 6.89 million. I must say that appendix within the report does give the detail of the specific grant allocations. The second item within the report is in relation to Department of Health and Social Care grants, and you can see in Appendix 1 there's details of £7.3 million worth of grants that have been awarded for specific adult social care conditions, and they're detailed within the report. And there's also an additional allocation for funding within the Workforce and Retention Fund, which is 1.4 million. So there's a significant amount of grants that have been received as detailed in Appendix 1 for the health adult social care fields. Appendix 2 of the report also details £3.472 million worth of grant funding that's been received in relation to public health. Appendix 2 details a summary of those, that 3.472. So in terms of the report is to recommend the acceptance of these grant funding schemes of significant amounts that the City Council has received over the course of the pandemic, totalling 7.3 million. So some significant funding that's received from the Department of Health and Social Care for adult social care and public health. The fourth item on the report is regarding the purchase of household waste recycling centre skips. The City and County Council are currently procuring a joint contract for the management of Derby and Derbyshire's 9 HWRCs, which includes the city site at Rainsway. A value for money exercise being carried out as part of that process, and the option of the council purchasing the skip has been determined rather than the contractor. The costing out of that is come to realise that actually it provides better value for money for the council to purchase the skips directly. The new contract will start early October 22, and it's recommended to delegate authority for the award of the joint contract for the purchase of the skips to the Strategic Director of Communities and Place and the Strategic Director of Corporate Resources in consultation with the relevant Cabinet members. It's recommended to approve the purchase of the skips and add this to the capital programme for 22-23, and also to approve and recommend to full council the service finance borrowing to purchase the skips of 250,000. So in essence, there's borrowing to buy the skips, but that's funded from the existing budgets within the service budgets that are responsible for managing those contracts. The fifth item of the report is in relation to local land charges, fees and charges. There's been a review of the local land charges service. So there's not been a review since the 1st of April 2017. The revised fee proposals are contained at Appendix 3. And the revised fees, on average the fees will not rise by 3.3%, but the fees have been determined in terms of being able to ensure that they cover the cost of the services in the allocation and determining of those particular services, that there's no subsidy provided by the council. So those revised fees are contained at Appendix 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. Any questions, queries, problems? Mike and then Lucy.
Yeah, in relation to the skips thing, Chair, I'd like to know a bit more detail. It doesn't have to be tonight, but there's 25 to 30 skips at £750,000 is about 8 to 10 grand a skip. So I assume that the county council have got some as well. There's no detail in here, how many are ours, whether they're shared, what the total number of skips being bought is. And I walk through a site regularly where I see dozens of abandoned ones. So at that sort of price, I don't want to see them going missing, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. Alison, can you help us with that, or do you need to get the information?
Well, I'll get some more information. I mean, the report does identify that we'll require between 25 and 30 skips for the Rainsway site. That's contained in 4.49 of the report. But in terms of the costings, I don't have that to detail.
Lucy?
And I'll start with the skips as well, because they're obviously going to be used by the operator at Rainsway, but there will be our skips, and I want to know who's insuring them and who's going to, be liable for their maintenance, because they're obviously quite a valuable asset as a group. So I don't know if you've got answers on
Alison,
that.
can you help us with that insurance, the skip?
But it ought to be covered within that future contract.
It will be covered in the contract. The contract will be very specific about responsibilities and accountabilities, but I can get the details of those for you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Alison.
Chair, I also wanted to comment on this grant funding from the government, and I'm very aware that we've been really grateful to have these sums of money arrive, and they're meeting needs that we have definitely had within the city. But it seems a bit poor that these are being formally received now when we've actually spent most of this money. Otherwise, we won't be spending it before the end of March. So procedurally, I feel that they should have managed to get through the system sooner. In terms of probity, we've used the money, we needed the money, but are there something within our processes that we should be looking at? Because this situation might arise again in a different way. And a specific question in terms of the use of the grants to ensure that we've got the support that we need for people keeping people out of hospital and coming out of hospital. Are we allowed to use that in other ways? Within Derby we have our local area coordinators who are doing work in this field and engaging with the public. And we've had a lot of talk about the way in which our community can support itself. And this seems to me an area where we potentially could be using a bit of this funding to take forward that ethos further. And I don't know whether it's something that we're allowed to do, whether it's still time to do, something that we should be exploring further. So a bit more clarity on that.
Thank you, Lucy. Alison?
Yes, I mean, the grant conditions are very tight and specific in terms of what you can use the funding for. But I can assure you that actually we have, where we've been able to do that, lots of council services have been supported through this funding and through the different types of funding to enable them to add capacity, to be able to deliver faster and better. So we have absolutely, yes, looked at opportunities where that funding can support us to be able to respond better as a council, and that includes our own services, but obviously within the constraints of the grant funding. But yes, we have done that.
Thank you, Alison. Okay.
Chair, the timeliness of them being reported.
About the time, yeah.
I accept that that's obviously the grants come quite quickly, the response is needed quite quickly, the reporting is retrospectively, so I accept that.
Thank you, Alison.
Chair, it may not be something that you can answer, but maybe it's something that Stephen can, in terms of when the money has been received, should it have been done through an urgent chief executive action or something like that and been reported to us more quickly?
I don't know who can help us with that. Rachel or Alison?
do have processes in place for escalation and urgent decisions to be taken into account, yes. I suppose this is one of many grant funding streams that we've had over the years, but yes, we could have looked at doing that. I think the importance was, because the grant funding was heavily constrained within grant conditions, most of it had to be passed to the sector. The risk was probably deemed quite low in terms of the flexibility for this particular funding, but yes, there are processes in place to do that.
Thanks, Alison. Okay, if there's no more questions on that, we'll move on to item 15, and that's revision of council tax support scheme for 2022-2023. You're earning your money tonight, Alison. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is a revision to the council tax support scheme for 22-23. You may recall that actually the 22-23 council tax scheme is an annual report and has already been through the process and was actually reported to Cabinet on the 8th of December for the 22-23 scheme. So we'd actually done the work and revised and got the scheme approved. However, on the 3rd of February, when the government announced the payment of £150 would be linked to the energy prices for households living in the council bands A to D, it became apparent that we needed to make some exclusions within the council tax support scheme to ensure that that benefit, that £150 benefit, was exempt from any calculations around council tax support. So in order to exempt that £150 rebate or energy rebate or council tax rebate, however we want to deem it, we've got to revise the council tax support scheme. So this report really is to approve the council tax support scheme in terms of the exemption of that particular relevant element, and is a revision of the scheme that was already approved by Cabinet on the 8th of December. Thank you.
Can I ask, Alison, at the last executive scrutiny, we were concerned about the logistical nightmare of getting this £150 help to 40,000 people in the city, and we made a recommendation to Cabinet, they write to government, in terms of trying to deal with this logistical nightmare to get that money out to the people that needed it. I think the situation's got worse, as we know, with what's going on in the Ukraine and elsewhere, with energy prices likely to be hitting £3,000 per household within less than a year. It's even more urgent that we get that help to get that money out to the people that desperately need it. How's that letter gone to government, asking for that additional response and help? And if not, why not? And I think we need some feedback on that, Alison. Can you provide that?
I don't know if the letter's gone, Chair. I do know we're working incredibly hard to get that money out to
Can you and Rachel chase that up, please?
I will chase that up, yeah.
And I'm just wondering whether we need a recommendation for tomorrow night to Cabinet on this. So, I mean, I don't know if members would agree that that executive scrutiny recommends that Cabinet urgently gets a response from government to our request that Cabinet agreed to write to them, asking for additional resources to ensure that those people that desperately need this £150 each, that's 40,000 of them, get it as soon as possible. So before I take a seconder on that, and I can see that Heidi is willing to do that. Rachel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, I'm not aware whether we've written the letter yet, but I do know that the Local Government Association have expressed in very strong terms on behalf of the whole government sector our concern about the practicality of us getting this money out effectively. So it is an issue that's been taken up nationally by many councils across the board, but just want to add that to the debate.
Good. I think that's good. But if we can help by helping Cabinet, by asking and urging them to get this response, I think that can only be a good thing. Heidi will second to that. Hopefully it's not controversial. Can I take those in favour, please show? Those against, please show. I think that's passed. So you've got the flavour of that, haven't you, Stephen? Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Alison. Moving on to item 16, which is the levelling up and devolution. Rachel, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. This is a report we wanted to bring to Cabinet. It talks in very clear and overarching terms about the white paper for levelling up, which we've long awaited from government, finally published in January this year, which is a set of proposals. I'm sure members have seen this in the local government press, in how we tackle the regional disparity in economic and social outcomes across England. So really important, that level of inequality that we see in our regions. It has 12 missions, and we've mapped those for members' interest in the appendix against our council plan and our priorities. So we'll carry on working on what that might mean for us and the implications for us as an authority. But in the meantime, and the reason for this report being brought forward tonight, is that there are opportunities within the white paper for ways of maximising resources and powers for the city that are worth investigating further. And we've brought this report to give Cabinet oversight of ongoing conversations about that. That is really about the devolution opportunity. So I'm sure members are very much aware of the various parts of the country that have devolved arrangements around combined authorities. The West Midlands is a great example, quite close to home. Manchester and other places, South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, other places across the country that have combined authority devolution deals that devolve powers, flexibility and funding down to the more local level to be able to make priority decisions about what they're doing. An interesting comment perhaps back on the previous debate about our funding from government coming individually all the time and having more flexibility over that funding rather than bidding for that independent departments individually. So just to be clear, we have worked with the county in Derbyshire on a county deal proposal, and in the white paper it was announced that 9 places in the country were identified as being open for further conversation with government on a county deal. However, in the white paper, the clarity about what you achieve for your area, the level of flexibility, power and freedom you could get from different levels of devolution were made more explicit. And the opportunity for a combined authority, a mayoral combined authority, clearly gives much more power, flexibility and funding than you would get under the other arrangements. And so over recent weeks, and it has been a matter of weeks, there have been conversations across the D2N2 area, so Derby, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, our LEP geographical footprint, with leaders and with chief executives to say, is there something here about an opportunity for that part of the East Midlands to come together to consider a combined authority that would give us additional power, control over some of the key transport investments, skills allocation of skills funding, some of those powers around some of the economy and funding pots, also increase the voice that we would have, if you like, at a national level, and support some of those really important outcomes for our city and our region. So those conversations have been going on to explore the opportunity. Is very much exploratory at this stage, but a real sense that we do feel as a region we've lost out quite considerably to the West Midlands over many years. If you look at any of the funding allocations that come through the budget and the CSR processes, there's always funding going to the combined authorities that we don't get access to. So work is happening as we speak. It is a negotiation with government. There is no clarity exactly of the process, of how that might work, and clearly any formal proposal around moving to that sort of arrangement would need to come back to Cabinet and to full council for approval. Anything that devolves powers or changes powers needs to come back at that stage. So this is really a report to flag with members and Cabinet that we are having these informal conversations across that D2N2 space with our colleague authorities. One of the key things that has changed, if you like, in the white paper around devolution is there is no veto for district and borough councils. So it's the unitary and the county council, the first tier authorities that are required to come to an agreement about a potential combined devolution package, and that isn't able to be vetoed by district councils. Clearly they have a role, district councils, they're really important, but it does change the opportunity, if you like, that might have been in the previous devolution arrangements that were put forward by government. So we are looking very seriously at that. We're working with our colleagues across the D2N2 geography, and further reports will be brought back to Cabinet and further, obviously, Council if necessary, if that comes to anything that's positive. But I think it's just really flagging to members this opportunity is being taken seriously, as it would really be a game changer for our economy and our social outcomes for the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I mean, I welcome any moves to try to address the unfairness of the situation, because I'm not sure that civil servants in London or the government knows where the East Midlands is, or whether they actually care, even if they do. And certainly because we've missed out consistently on funding and freedoms that other areas have got. And hopefully this will now at long last be addressed. We missed out on HS2, we missed out on the electrification of the line to Derby, and the knock-on effects for everybody concerned, to name just but two. So I welcome any moves that can address something that's been a wrong to this area and this region for many, many decades. Any comments at all? Hardiel and then Lucy. Hardiel.
Yeah, I mean, I support the ambition of the levelling up paper, and I support anything that can make a difference to the East Midlands. But the paper is really still light on detail and on things that can make a difference, which is funding. What do we know when are we going to get tangible bits of information that we could really consider and then really push strongly across party, I would say, to make that happen for Derby and get the levelling up inequalities that matter. And some of them are not, I think, as well documented in this document, such as health inequalities, age, life expectancy in different parts of the city, opportunities to get employment, all those sort of things. So it's still a paper which is sort of high strategic ambition rather than actually tangible outcomes that can make a difference. Are you able to comment on that, please?
Thank you, Hardiel.
Yeah,
Rachel?
Some of those comments are around the Levelling Up white paper itself and the missions, and I think we've tried to put in the appendix how we've mapped what we're trying to do locally against those, but there is no clarity from government about how they're going to fund or support those things to happen. They are quite ambitious, but that's quite important. On the devolution issue, we are simply flagging that the opportunity has arisen for us to do potentially a deal with government. We've only had one meeting with civil servants to date. That was very much an indicative, exploratory meeting where they were very positive and welcomed the possibility of the two county cities coming together, the four councils across the footprint, very positively received. The detail work is being worked up now. What does that mean? What do we ask for? What are our aspirations? And then there will be a negotiation with government on what we can possibly get from them to do in that devolution arrangement. But it is really, really early days, first few weeks. Wanted to signal with Cabinet it's happening, but clearly we'll bring back paper with the detail once we get into that level of information is available.
Thank you, Rachel. Lucy?
Can I say first that I really appreciate having a paper like this because its recommendations are merely to note, and it's actually not very often that we get papers to Cabinet which are just there providing information about what's going on, which are then available for all councillors and the public to read. So the concept of having this paper, I think, is really healthy, and I value it. It's actually a really political paper. It's very much moving from this drip effect of government controlling, national government controlling local government, which we see through the grants, through the controls, through the step-by-step, little-by-little feed that we get. And the levelling up, the way that levelling up is being done, to me, is saying it's more of the same thing. It's not enabling local government to actually do what is right for its people. It's the government still trying to micromanage the way in which local areas should be controlled. It's not providing the funding that we need to do what we want. It's tying us into a straitjacket to somehow sing to the government's tune. Particularly in the current climate where we have far too much control with one person in Russia, I believe in a democracy where there are many people making a combined decision, and not one person, in this case being a metro mayor, making the bulk of the decisions for an area. I do not like that either. I think that we ought to look at the power coming from the people and being held amongst a group of people, not with one figurehead. So I really welcome that we've had this paper. I do not like the direction that the government is going in, but quite frankly, I can't see a way around it because we desperately need the money to be coming to the area, even if we don't like the way, and additional levels of bureaucracy being built in, and levels of bureaucracy mean more spending that is not actually getting through to where we need it to be. So thank you, Chair, and I apologise, I can't think of a recommendation I want to put to Cabinet on this, but that's just my views on the matter.